Hello and welcome to Good Morning UK Have Your Say, a Force for Good's mid-morning show coming to you live from our nerve centre here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow with me, your host, Alistair McConaughey. Welcome to our 23rd show since we started, and it seems we have been setting a trend. We now have a competitor on the scene, I'm glad to say, in the shape of GBNews. Because it does seem that there is a market for some free talking ideas. And we've got a great show lined up for you today. At the top of the hour, we have the legend who is Max Dunbar, who is our guest for 20 minutes. And we're going to be talking to him about the COVID situation, about footballers kneeling, and about is the G7 trying to transition our economy, and indeed, will the old normality ever come back? So that'll be coming up with Max at the top of the hour. In the meantime, lovely to see all the folk coming in. So good morning to all of you. Now, what are your thoughts this morning on I know it's a competitor, but we do have to talk about them. We're a happy competitor with GB News. What are your thoughts? Has anybody been watching GB News? And what do you think of its potential? Please do tell us if you've got an opinion on that. Good morning to you, Samuel. And Marlene, she says, GB News has been great. Maybe we'll see you on it soon. Well, I would love to be on GB News, Marlene. I think that would be great. I do hope that they do have a Scottish correspondent, of course, and they do have the great Neil Oliver on it. And so if they want to be a competitor to the BBC Scotland and STV here in Scotland, then it will be a very good idea for them to interview grassroots voices who are for the union, and thereby help to change the narrative, because all we're seeing, of course, as we know, all we ever see on STV or BBC is the same old faces, some of them mainly all SNP and Scottish Nationalist supporters, but some of them who shouldn't even be on the television because of the things that they're saying or have said in the past, such as the woman last week who gets a regular slot on the mainstream media, but she didn't want any people in Scotland who read the Daily Telegraph. You know, people like that, they shouldn't be anywhere near a mainstream media camera. But of course, the media up here totally fets them, gives them a platform, and that leads to a kind of toxic environment that's been created, as we know, by the Scottish Nationalists up here. But that's what we're doing. We're trying to combat that, contradict it, and give an opposing view. Bill says, GB News is good besides some tech glitches. Well, we know all about tech glitches. When you're trying to start something, it's always an issue with audio and lighting and all that sort of thing until you get it just right. And Bill says he's annoyed at the advertisers trying to pull the plug on them. Well, yes, there's appears to be one or two advertisers who for some reason don't want to be associated with GB News. Debbie says it's good but needs to get better. Sound hasn't been brilliant, but they said they had improved it this morning. And Sandra says that she enjoys Dan Wootton's show at 9. Although Richard says, good point here, same old faces without any balance, hence the need for AFFG News and GB News. Yes, the STV and so on are the same old tired faces, exactly. That's why we need these new voices on the show. And Stephen points out quite rightly, advertisers will return as soon as the viewing figures rise. Well, they've had very good viewing figures in the last couple of days, better even than STV or BBC. And there you go. Sandra says that Dan Wootton's got Lawrence Fox on tonight, both anti-lockdown, and Andrew Neil is interviewing Rishi Sunak. That's interesting, interviewing a government minister. I hope they don't have to compromise their principles too much to get government ministers on, because at the end of the day it is all about access. And in this book, which we're punting each week, A State of Fear by Laura Dodsworth, she points out as well that if you are a mainstream media company and you're not taking the government line, the government is not obliged to put up with you, really. really. They don't want to invite you to the press conferences, and they don't want to appear on your programme. And to an extent, you can get corrupted by that. So I do hope that GB News will be able to maintain its principles at the same time as it's able to interview these government ministers, because they will be making demands on that programme and saying you can't be pushing a particular line or we're not going to cooperate with you. And I know some people have been a little bit concerned in the past 48 hours about the extent to which GB News might be continuing the COVID consensus, which would be disturbing, but let's hope they won't. As Sandra says there, they've got Lawrence Fox on tonight, and he's strongly anti-lockdown. So that's good news. That's good news. Ryan says so far he's found the content to be well balanced and informative. They could have a brighter set, he says. And there you go. Bill says the BBC tried to stop them getting into the pool to access live feeds of events, so the BBC must be afraid. Well, the BBC's got good reason to be afraid of those things. Well, Adam, it'll last in Scotland, I think, for a while, because there's definitely a market for it as well. The National's trying to pretend that there isn't a market for it, but there most certainly is, especially on the pro-UK angle. And so glad that they had Neil Oliver on, who made that amazing comment last week when he said, until the day that he dies, he will be British. So that's the sort of attitude we need to hear, because we just don't hear this. We don't hear this from the mainstream media. They keep out A Force for Good. We've been going for 12 years. We've been going since 2012, which is 9.5 years, and BBC's never invited us onto a programme. And same goes for all the grassroots unionist groups that we know of, not being invited onto the BBC or STV. So maybe that'll change. Maybe that'll change with GB News. Let's hope so. They certainly seem to be fairly well resourced in order to do that. Now, Bill says, I like how Koppenberg and Grosch said that they were a brand for everyone, and that was the reason why they were pulling out their advertisements. But at the end of the day, who drinks Koppenberg? Whatever that is, that's a kind of cider, but it's not really a proper cider, and there's plenty of British ciders that you can drink from instead of some Swedish company. And as for Grosch, goodness me, very few people drink that anyway. Well, do you know, we've got, stay with us at the top of the hour, we've got the legend who is Max Dunbar coming up. And before then, we've got a big announcement that we're going to make in a few minutes about a new project which A Force for Good is launching publicly today. We've been working behind the scenes on this for the last fortnight. It's been coming together extremely well, and we're going to launch it today on this programme. We've got Adam there says, what's your opinion on Scotland losing to the Czech Republic? 2-0 was it? I think it was. Scotland faces England this Friday, and if they lose to England, it'll be humiliating to the Scots. Well, we kind of stay out of the actual taking sides on football and that sort of matter, but we are concerned about the politics of the matter around that. And certainly the SNP have used the Scottish football team to promote that sense of nationalism. Whether it works or not, I don't know, but the SNP will try to use the Scottish football team to try to promote its own agenda, but hopefully the Scottish football team will try to stay away from that. But unfortunately, they have politicised themselves with all this taking the knee situation, because that's just a wee point that I'll bring in there. A week ago, they said that they weren't going to take the knee, that they were going to stand instead, and they were going to link arms in some kind of, I don't know, idea against whatever it was that this is meant to be, like, you know, against what are they kneeling for anyway? Against racial prejudice and for Black Lives Matter, things like that. Anyway, they said, the Scottish football team said they weren't going to kneel, and everybody's like, hooray! Grown men are not going to prostrate themselves on the ground anymore, and they're Scottish, isn't that wonderful? But then, of course, that quickly got out, and the Scottish National Party specifically, and their hangers-on, and all the usual suspects did not like that and put pressure on the Scottish football team to kneel. Okay, so when Scotland meet England on Friday at Wembley, England's going to be kneeling and Scotland's going to be kneeling. And I put out a message on Twitter. I goes, why does Scotland have to do what England's doing? You know, why can't England stand? with Scotland. And if they want to stand against whatever it is they're complaining about, fine. But why does Scotland have to kneel with England? You know, it's like ultimate prostration, ultimate submission is what it's like. It's really, it's bad, and I totally disapprove of grown men on their knees. It's so embarrassing, and in fact, it's stomach churning. It's stomach churning. I find it's like just sick. Oh man. Anyway, totally puts you off the beautiful game. It really does. Richard says, the Nats poison everything, including the friendly rivalry between the Scotland and England football teams. It's very sad. And individuals should do what they want. They should choose how they want to do it, instead of being forced into doing any particular thing. Christopher says, the SNP and the Yes movement will use anything that looks populist to their advantage. They've hijacked the saltire and football, and so many people have allowed them to do so by voting for them. That's true. Sandra says, we can't have the English team looking more anti-racist by kneeling. She thinks a certain person has had a word. And, oh, absolutely, a certain person has had a word. And here in Scotland, we're living in a kind of, what's the word for a state where the entire public sector and everything has to submit to the state? That's a kind of place that we're in at the moment, an all-encompassing state where everybody has to look to the dear leader to decide to get direction. Richard, you're putting the words into my mouth here. I wouldn't be surprised if the ruling to kneel came straight from Sturgeon. Yeah, absolutely. An all-encompassing Republican state, says William Fraser. Well, let me make a grand announcement just while I can. Thank you for all your comments that are coming in. A Force for Good is always trying to grow and trying to grow our outreach. And in order to do that, we have to be on as many social media platforms as possible. But we can't just be on them. We have to be able to work them effectively. And we have to reach out to the people who are on those, whether that's on Facebook, which we've been working for since 2016 now and have got a very good following, whether that's on Twitter, whether that's on Instagram, where we're the biggest Instagram Unionist page in the world, or whether that is on YouTube. And we've played around with other sites as well that we're on, that we don't necessarily work hard, but we have a presence on them, such as, for example, BitChute, Rumble, where we put up our videos as well. We're on one or two others as well. But these main ones that I've said are the ones that we really work hard every day. Well, we have now furthermore, an additional social media channel where we're going to work very hard. We have built the skills on it, and we have got the commitment to do it, and we've got a fantastic person who can do this for us. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am announcing today that A Force for Good is now on TikTok. TikTok.com/@UK A Force for Good. Now, we've been working that behind the scenes to see how it works, to see if we can be effective. And TikTok is a video channel, and we've put out, in the last 2 weeks, we've put out 7 very short videos, none of which include dancing, I might add. So you won't get much of that on there from us, certainly not yet. But videos from our Thin Red Line and 1 or 2 other quirky little things up there. We've put out 7 videos. We've already got over 58,000 views on these 7 videos. And we have over 470 followers. So we quickly decided that yes, we are on to something here. Now, TikTok is a slightly younger demographic, and we were alerted to the importance of getting onto TikTok by an article which appeared in the Daily Telegraph a couple of months ago, pointing out that it's basically a Scottish nationalist free-for-all on there. Very few unionist voices at all. And so we need to get on there to reach this slightly younger generation, slightly younger demographic, with our pro-British, pro-UK, Britain is great message. And it looks like we can really, really work this. We raised the funding specifically for this project. We're so grateful to those who came forward to help us specifically to get onto this platform and to be able to ensure that we can stay on it for the next 6 months at least. Hopefully going through the next year and right through the future, getting thousands and thousands of followers and indeed millions of views of our videos. And we're going to be putting out short videos every week on that channel as well. So that's another little victory for the pro-UK message. Now, we're very, very pleased about that. So that's TikTok. Note it's tiktok.com/ and it's got that little @ sign, which is unusual in a URL specifically, but it's got that @UK, a force for good. So that's announcing a Force for Good's TikTok project, which is confirmed for the next 6 months and almost certainly going in now year on year. So that's some great news for unionism. Most people think of TikTok, they think of dancing nurses, because that's really what put it onto the public consciousness last year. But we're not, as I say, we haven't been dancing yet. It's not actually a dancing platform. I should quickly add, you can put anything up there. Ross says that he feels that TikTok is a nationalist stronghold. Yes, it is at the moment, and we are at the gates to break into it. It's great to have a strong unionist presence on there at last. Indeed, a win for us, says Ross. And Catherine says, fantastic news. Now, just before we come up to the top of the hour with our guest, I just want to mention a report which appeared this week called How Progressive Anti-Imperialism Threatens the United Kingdom. And it's written by a couple of academics, Professor Nigel Biggar and Professor Doug Stokes. And basically they are pointing out the dangers of the progressive woke BLM ideology and how it can be used against not just the United Kingdom and its history, but against the Union specifically. And of course, this was something that we recognised last year as well. And a Force for Good even went through to Edinburgh to counter a BLM demo, which was demonstrating against one of Scotland's greatest sons, Henry Dundas. So we know the dangers of that. And one of the recommendations that was made by this report was actually that unionists need to put together videos and memes distilling the core unionist message and get them out there as much as physically possible. And of course, that's what we're actually taking forward. That's what we are doing here at A Force for Good. And TikTok is one of the ways to do that. So we're actually putting into effect what this report was advising. I'm very pleased. I'm very pleased to say. And in fact, the National ran a report complaining about that report because one of the said row after call to rid Scottish classroom of pro-indy bias, because one of the very good points that was made in that report by Professor Biggar and Stokes is that we need an organisation to look into the teaching of history in Scottish schools and to see just the extent of the bias that's there, if it exists, and indeed the teaching in Scottish schools generally, and to see to what extent the Scottish National Party have got its tentacles into every single element. I mean, we know that. We know they have. They have the First Minister's Reading Challenge, which usually comes up every summer, where children are encouraged by the First Minister to read, and it's called the First Minister's Reading Challenge. I think there's actually even a Deputy First Minister's Reading Challenge or Maths Challenge or something like that. They just get in everywhere. On any topic, they will put their oar in. And so we need some kind of public organisation to investigate this and to make it clear. And of course, that started to panic the National in this article which they've written. And we even got a mention in this, by the way. We even got a mention in this article for some reason. So we are getting through to the National, because the National's always watching us, because, it's interested in what we authentic unionists are saying. Now, On this day in British history, a man died who was an academic and an author, and he enriched British life immeasurably by penning the words to one of our best loved patriotic songs. His name was Arthur Benson, and he wrote the famous words, "Land of hope and glory, mother of the free. How shall we extol thee, who are born of thee? Wider still and wider shall thy bounds be set. God who made thee mighty, make thee mightier yet." That was Arthur Benson, and he passed away on this day, on the 17th of June in 1925. He wrote the words to Land of Hope and Glory. Now, he didn't write the music to Land of Hope and Glory. That was written by Elgar, and the melody is taken from Edward Elgar's Pomp and Circumstance March. But Elgar asked Benson to write words for it because it was Edward VII who had actually said to Elgar that would make a cracking song if you could find some words for that. So Arthur Benson rose to the occasion and put those words together. And he was the son of Edward Benson, who became the Archbishop of Canterbury. And he had a brother, Robert, but he's not to be confused with his brother Robert. So Arthur Benson passed away on this day, 17th of June 1925. Richard says, certainly inspired lyrics. Imagine coming up with that verse. Utterly, it's amazing. Wider still and wider shall thy bounds be set is a good Unionist phrase as well, because it suggests that we look throughout the British Isles, and indeed we look throughout the world for our British identity, whereas the Scottish nationalists tend to take the opposite view. Rather than being open in that way, they tend to be much more insular. So wider still and wider shall thy bounds be set is a really good motto for the Unionist cause. Now, I see that our guest is in the studio, so I'm just going to bring him in now. Now, our guest is the legend who is Max Dunbar, and I'll just bring him in right now. Hello there, Max. Can you hear me loud and clear?
Yes, I can, Alistair. Good to see you.
Fantastic. Well, you are known far and wide as the legend who is Max Dunbar, and for those of our viewers who are not aware of that, it's because you were one of the people at the very start who helped us start A Force for Good, but you are the person who encouraged us to get onto the street and who encouraged us to be out there standing up for the Union. And since then you've become our chief of security, and you liaise very carefully with the police, and we're very grateful for you for doing that. And we totally, as an organisation, rely upon you, and of course the rest of the team members as well, the folk who do our Instagram, the folk who do our Facebook, and the folk who do our video and graphic and political outreach work. So thanks for everything that you do for the cause, Max. And a few things we want to say. Debbie's saying hi, Max, and Adam says
hello,
hi.
Debbie.
Now, Max, do you follow football at all? Is that something?
No, I don't. Obviously, I'm aware of the various controversies that have been surrounding the game in the last few days, but I'm not really interested in particularly following football. No.
Okay, but do you have an opinion on the taking the knee thing that Scotland's doing at the moment? Why do you think, for example, that instead of England standing, linking arms, doing the gesture that Scotland were going to do, why is it that Scotland has to get down on its knees with England? Why is that?
Well, I think it was a surprise to hear that Scotland were not going to be taking the knee initially, you'd have thought that the way things are run in Scotland, as you've been outlining earlier on in this programme, that there would have been no question of Scotland not taking the knee. I mean, that gave us some sort of hope and optimism that perhaps there were independent minds at work who did not consider that an appropriate gesture to make. But it's no surprise that Scotland is now going to be taking the knee. No surprise.
I was so upset with that because, as you were saying, it looked like they were going to actually be men.
Yes.
Yes. But they've just turned out to be wimps again.
Yeah. I mean, the players themselves have really not much choice in the matter. They're earning vast amounts of money, apparently, and they don't want to lose that, and they'll just do what they're told, I presume. It's really the managers and the people behind who in turn have had pressure put on them, ultimately by the government, and the government's various, stooges to behave in that way. So that's the way it is. As I say, I was very surprised that there was talk of them not taking the knee in the first place.
Yes.
Especially in Scotland. Scotland, one of the most politically correct countries I can think of. And not only that, but run by people who at one time, not that long ago, would be considered to be real hardline extremists. Scotland has really kind of reverted back to 1600s, before the Union existed. This is a new phenomenon. This taking the knee behaviour, and it's not one that's welcome. That's for sure.
Yes, it's not. It's a new phenomenon, and it's not one that's good. And I want to ask you again your opinion now. Last week, Humza Yousaf claimed that there were several children in hospital with COVID, and it turns out that there were actually none. But what he was basically trying to do was to promote the idea that children are at risk from COVID in order that they can then, in a month or so, roll out vaccinations to everybody over 12 years old. So he deliberately told something that was just not correct. And this week we learned that Education Scotland has issued a document to teachers telling them to look out for what they're calling conspiracy theories among children, which is basically children who don't want to get the vaccination for various reasons. I mean, do you see that as part and parcel of what's happening at the moment?
Yes, it's really using the template of the old Soviet Union, and the way that people were forced to conform totally and submit to the state. And one of the ways of doing that is to humiliate. And this is a form of humiliation as well, because anyone who tries to resist is forced against their will to comply, and that takes something away from your own character and personality and your self-respect. How can you respect yourself if you've been forced to do something against your will ideologically? You have to be able to stand up for yourself. But if you feel through pressure, threats, this is like a threat to your family, effectively. And people, of course, most people will they'll submit and go along with it out of fear. So we're really being dominated by a regime of fear, and that's how it works. And if you read history, particularly as I say about the techniques and methods employed by the Soviets, and East Germany is a very good one to study. There are the various books on that subject. There's one called Stasi, which I would recommend that people try and read. I'm just trying to remember the name of the author. His name escapes me, but he's an American author. But that gives you a very good insight into the mindset of the current regime and how they enforce their orthodoxies on us.
Yes, totally. And what it's about control, and you said there about fear. I think there's two ways that you can control people. One is through fear, and that's really been quite evident during this COVID situation. People are afraid often of what they perceive as the unknown, and therefore they can be manipulated. And you can also control people through their sense of virtue. And you see that with the BLM kneeling. It's like, well, they're only kneeling because they're trying to be nice to, foreign people or something like that. So people go, oh, I'll go along with it because I'll get down on my knees because it's the right thing to do and it'll make me feel virtuous. So you can manipulate people by by making them afraid, or by trying to get them to feel virtuous in some way.
And there's a great desire of most people have a desire to conform. I mean, we're kind of herd animals, I suppose. We live in groups, and it's very difficult to go against the conformist or the conformity of the group. So naturally, people don't want to stand out and stick their head above the parapet. It takes an unusual character not to do that. But there have been that book I mentioned, by the way, Stasi, is by John O. Kohler. There was one particular character that he mentions in this book who did provide resistance to the state, and despite solitary confinement, torture, and so on, he never gave in and compromised his principles, his position.
Yes, there you go. Graham's is the author, John O. Koehler. Kohler.
Kohler, yeah. I'd recommend that book. Not exactly a cheerful read, but it's very informative. Gives you some insights.
Well, these are the insights that we're needing right now, because we are under assault. It's like a psychological war that's going on.
And the thing is, the British people have never really been exposed to anything like this before. I mean, we're not like the Eastern Europeans who've lived under a totalitarian system. That the older Eastern Europeans, people of our age and older probably by now, but they know what it's like to live under a totalitarian system, whereas the British people are innocent in that respect. So we need to be inoculated against that kind of system. But I think we're learning, but we're learning slowly. But the trouble is, we're learning slower than the regime is able to impose its controls on us. So the danger is that we're going to end up without being able to even object or take any kind of action to counter this evil ideology that's being imposed upon us.
Yes. I keep mentioning that book, State of Fear by Laura Dodsworth, but it is quite shocking the extent to which the state has got all of this wrapped up. I mean, there's so many agencies, including, unfortunately, it has to be said, an agency of the British Army that is involved essentially in promoting government orthodoxy on certain things and accusing people who disagree of being extremists, as we've seen from this Education Scotland document. But basically calling anybody extremists if they don't agree, if they push what they're calling conspiracy theories about the vaccine. And as we know from social media so far, that can just be being skeptical about the need to take it if you're under 70 years old. I mean, that is basically going to become what they're calling an extremist idea. And children, of course, are very vulnerable because they are institutionalized, and they, again, is the social factor as well. They have to go along with what the rest of the children are doing, and they don't necessarily want to stand out. But basically, wider conspiracy theories relating to anti-vax, and that will be enough for your teacher to be alerted to you, and I don't know, send you somewhere. But that's in Scotland right now.
Well, this is a technique straight out of the Stasi handbook. Children informing on their parents. I mean, it's blatant.
Yes,
and it's horrifying, actually.
It's horrifying, and it's unconscionable, utterly unconscionable. And we've got the Nicola Sturgeon saying that she will, and I find this personally horrifying, and I'm going to say the First Minister said, quote, "I can confirm that if the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation does recommend the use of vaccine for children aged 12 and over. We will move as quickly as practically possible to implement their advice. Now, I think that's unconscionable and utterly criminal. I'll say it. I think that's criminal for her to do that.
Yes.
For this particular thing that nobody actually knows for sure, because it's been rushed through.
It has.
So yeah, it's unconscionable, and it's very, very disturbing behaviour. And I'm looking on Twitter, some people are saying they're just going to take the children out of school. Whether they do that or not, I don't know.
Look, people, say they'll do this and do that, but when the reality hits home, it's a different matter.
Yeah.
Plus pressure from family and friends. As I said earlier, people want to comply with that, and it's difficult to resist.
Yes.
Difficult to resist.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, we had the G7 meeting as well this week, and I wonder the extent to which all of this lockdown is part of an attempt to transition the country to some sort of new kind of economy, where there's going to be an awful lot less, travel, less hospitality. Got any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I went to drop my sister off at the Glasgow airport a couple of days ago, and I was the only car in the drop-off point. The only car. There was one other woman, I think, waiting on the side for something or somebody. But it was strange. I mean, it felt as if, again, going back to the old Eastern European thing, it felt a bit like you might be in some Eastern Bloc country pre-1989 or something. I mean, it was just, that's how it felt. That was the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. One other car did actually draw up behind me as I was leaving, but it was a very, very strange feeling. And I think there is some truth in that idea that we may be undergoing some sort of political change, metamorphosis into a new kind of society. And all this talk, green talk, last time I spoke with you, we were talking about green issues, but the green movement is really an extremist movement. It's morphed into a kind of far left extremist movement, but supported by, it would seem, some very rich, influential people. I'm not quite sure what their motivations are. Possibly, I mean, this talk, Bond-esque talk of world domination by some evil kind of force, but I mean, maybe there's some truth in that. I don't know. But there's no doubt about it that the economy is not going to, the country is not going to go back to the way it was. People talk about back to normal. Well, there isn't going to be any back to normal. Forget it. We're never, ever going to go back to the way it was before. That just is not going to happen. It doesn't matter who's in power, whether the right wing or left wing or this or that. We're not going to go back to the way it was. Yeah. Forget it. Yeah. You just have to plan for the future. But the way things are going just now, it's not looking good.
Yeah.
Not looking good. Yeah. And talk of 5-year plans, 10-year plans, 15-year plans, all that sets alarm bells ring for me. Again, through the history books and so on. I think it's very sinister, the whole thing. And it's strange how the economy, if you look at the stock market's quite buoyant at the moment. There are companies that are doing very well, but there are other areas of the economy that just seem to have been written off. They seem to have been compensated for, in some ways, by other businesses that have done well out of this pandemic. And I suppose as long as the government tax take continues, the government will continue with their policies.
Yes.
So if you're in the pub business, the airline business, holidays and so on, well, it's just tough luck. I think that's the attitude probably from the government. You just have to try and find some other form of employment or set up some other kind of business. Yes. There seems to be some kind of revolution going on. It's a revolution. We're undergoing right now. We're undergoing a revolution. You have to recognise that.
I do think
whether or not you go along with it, and if or how to direct it or thwart it.
Absolutely, and I've been speaking to one or two other people who are in the Unionist field, and it's like, if these lockdowns continue, I mean, this whole idea of the United Kingdom in the first place, I mean, what's it going to kind of represent in 2 or 3 years down the line? It's will it have an economy at all? I mean, it's all up in the air at the moment. It's all up in the air. That's all we can say. But there's something going on, and lots of different groups, as always, take advantage of it for their own particular ends. And you'll see, the climate change fanatics, they're taking advantage of it to basically stop people travelling. I believe that is part of what's going on, to stop air travel for whatever reasons they think that's a good thing. And that's definitely something. There's a change in the economy because they've noticed that they can actually just create money out of nothing, and in fact probably get away with it. I mean, I think that they can, because I don't personally believe this money's borrowed from anywhere. They've just created it so they can write it off. So they've realised they can run an economy to an extent on that.
Yeah.
And so
I mean, the other thing is, with all the Western economies seemingly doing more or less the same thing, there's no kind of comparative economic system to make with it. So if we're all as the West doing the same thing, then this business of massive inflation in one country but not in another, possibly that's old hat. And this is what's known as the Great Reset. I mean, initially when I heard this term, the Great Reset, I was skeptical about it. It just sounded like one of these sound bites that you get every so often. But I would say that we're definitely going through a revolutionary period. The West generally is going through a revolutionary period, and it's just whether or not there's a counter-revolution to that, and what form that counter-revolution takes. Now, if there is a counter-revolution and it's successful, we're not going to have democracy, because in order to defeat the current system, you require a stronger, more aggressive, more ruthless system to do so. And by its very nature, that kind of system is unlikely to be democratic, ultimately. Although maybe eventually things would settle down. Franco was in power for 40 odd years. It took a while, but Spain is now a democracy. It could be a similar to that, possibly. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? I mean, I've got the book there, The Great Reset, written by Klaus Schwab, and I don't know. I think he's just another actor who's taken advantage of things. He's got his own ideas, and he wants to do what he can in the situation. But as I say, there's so many different groups all just trying to take advantage of what is, as you say, a revolutionary circumstances. How it's all going to play out at the end, I don't know. But I think what we do need to realise is the severity of the situation that we're in, and that things are not going to quite be the same moving forward. How they play out, I don't know. But we'll just have to keep an eye on it, and we'll continue to talk about this, Max, because it's important to get. That's quite deep what we were talking about this morning, and I think that's important that these sort of deeper issues do get brought out in the whenever we possibly can. So, Max, we've had you on for a few extra minutes there, but that was because we had a few extra minutes in the broadcast, which the technology failed on us. But I like this workaround here. I think this could work. Maybe next time you're in the studio, we'll just start straight away from this.
It would appear to be technically simpler.
It certainly would appear to be technically simpler. So that's always a plus. So, Max, I'll say goodbye to you.
What I'll do is I'll move over and let you continue.
Aye, thanks very much. Thanks a lot. Great stuff. The legend who is Max Dunbar. Thank you for coming in. Ronald says Max is right. Paul wonders if lockdowns are part of a depopulation plan. Well, I hope that's the statistic is not correct there, Paul, what you just quoted there. And Diana of the Family Rose says they're trying to reset the economy. Certainly reset our lives, aren't they? Absolutely. And Graham says it's a cultural revolution without smashing churches and temples. That's true, although they're also trying to smash statues, though, aren't they? But it is that's where they're definitely learning. They've learned from that particular sort of cultural revolution. And of course, Stephen says if people do not return to the office, town centres will become desolate. That's the big concern, isn't it? Desolate, folks. I want to give a shout out to an absent friend called John Ingram. Now, we dedicated the wee book to John Ingram, and In it we said John Ingram, a great British patriot, a sterling supporter and a fearless activist. Now we're very pleased to say that his friends in the Falkirk area have got a wee crowdfunder going to buy a memorial bench for him, and we'll put up the link to that crowdfunder. If some of you knew John, you might be happy to just donate a few pounds to the crowdfunder. It's going to be one of these memorial benches that's carved from metal, that's got silhouettes of soldiers and poppies on the backrest of it, and it's going to sit at Avonside Memorial. That's something that you might want to help with. So that's John Ingram. He was the person that we dedicated this wee book to. A great activist, a great supporter of the Union. As Sandra said, he died way too young at 65. Folks, it's 11:32. It's the end of the programme. I hope you enjoyed our efforts today. Just like GB News, we've had a little bit of technical problems, but we actually had a workaround which works out better. So, all to the good. Alan says, have a great day. And Frankie says, thank you for your work. Folks, it just remains for me to say, do have a great week. We'll be back next week at 10:30 on Wednesday morning. So, bye to you, and it just remains for me to say, God bless the United Kingdom and God save the Queen. See you next week.